The sun was sinking behind the red ridges when the last train of the day wailed out of Red Hollow. The air it left behind tasted of metal and dust, a silence so wide it could swallow a man whole. Elias Boone sat on the station bench, his hat pulled low, the brim hiding a face that had forgotten what warmth felt like. He had been riding cattle lines and empty miles for years, trying to lose the ghosts that rode with him. Across the platform, a woman stood barefoot, her dark hair unbound and trembling in the wind. A blanket hung around her shoulders like the last remnant of a home she no longer had. She didn't cry, but her stillness was the kind born only after too much loss. When she began walking toward him, the evening light bent around her, the way it sometimes does when fate decides to lean close. She stopped before him, and her voice broke the quiet like a prayer whispered through smoke. "Please accept me as your wife. I lost my family today." Elias looked up slowly. He thought maybe grief had twisted her mind, but there was no madness in her eyes, only resolve and something ancient, like the land itself asking to be remembered. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I reckon you got the wrong man." "I have no one," she said simply. "And you look like someone who knows what it costs to have nothing left." The station master, old Harlan Pike, shifted by the ticket window, frowning but silent. The West was full of stories no one dared interrupt. Elias stared at the woman. He'd buried a wife once years ago in a Kansas field where the grass still whispered her name. Since then he'd carried silence like a brand on his soul. Something in this stranger's gaze, her steadiness, her quiet desperation, unsettled that silence. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara Whitefeather." "Elias Boone," he said almost absently. She nodded once as though the simple exchange sealed something between them. "Then we are husband and wife, Elias Boone." A bitter smile flickered on his lips. "It ain't that simple." "Nothing ever is," she murmured, and for the first time he noticed the faint tremor in her hands. Harlan stepped forward, voice gruff but soft. "Girl, you sure about this? You don't even know where he's headed." "I don't need to," she said. "I just need somewhere to stand that isn't ash." That broke something in Elias. The kind of sentence that doesn't ask for pity, only a place to breathe. He rose from the bench and tipped his hat. "All right," he said. "You can ride with me. For a while." The old man sighed and muttered, "May God forgive your kindness or your folly, whichever this is." That night they stayed in the station house, two strangers bound by absence. A kerosene lamp threw trembling light against the walls. Elias offered her his coat, then sat near the door pretending to doze. But her quiet breathing filled the room, and beneath it he heard the faint hum of a song, something mournful yet unbroken. He didn't understand the words, but the melody reminded him of rivers after rain. When dawn came, the desert lay silver and still. They boarded a westbound freight together and no one asked why. Days passed in the slow rhythm of travel. The land unfolded in shades of ochre and bone, and between them grew a silence that was neither hostile nor easy, simply necessary. Clara rode beside him in the wagon they bought from a rancher, her gaze always fixed on the horizon. She spoke little, but when she smiled, rare and small, it felt like forgiveness made visible. At a creek one evening, Elias caught her washing her blanket, the water shining around her arms like liquid glass. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked. She looked up. "There's nothing left behind me." He nodded, understanding more than he wished to. "Sometimes I reckon that's the only way a person starts over." Their life settled into quiet rhythm. His work at the ranch, her tending a small patch of soil where wildflowers tried their best to live. Yet the town they settled near did not forgive easily. When they walked together, eyes followed, her skin too dark, his loyalty too visible. Whispers trailed them like dust. One afternoon at the general store, a man spat near Clara's feet and said, "Didn't know cowboys took wives off the reservation now." Elias froze, his hand brushing the revolver at his hip. But Clara's hand found his arm first, light as a leaf. "No," she whispered. "Let them speak. Their words don't build homes." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They walked away. But that night he sat by the fire, shame and anger knotting his chest. She came beside him, setting down a tin of tea. "You don't need to defend me," she said. "I ain't defending you," he replied softly. "I'm defending what's decent." She studied him for a moment, then said, "You can't teach decency to those who never lost anything. Pain's the only school that works." Her words settled deep in him, heavier than any bullet. He reached out then, not to touch her but to steady himself, and found her hand already waiting halfway. Time moved on and seasons softened. They planted corn, mended fences, learned the quiet grace of work done side by side. Love, when it came wordlessly, through small gestures, through the warmth that lingered after laughter, through the way she looked at him when the sky burned red. Still, some nights she woke gasping from dreams of fire. He would hold her until her trembling stilled, whispering things he didn't know he still remembered how to say. And sometimes he thought, maybe this was what mercy looked like when it stayed long enough to bloom. The storm came in early spring. Black clouds gathered over the plains, the wind tearing through their small cabin. Elias worked to bar the shutters, but the roof rattled like bones. Clara stood in the doorway, lightning flashing behind her, eyes wild with old fear. "It sounds like the night they came," she whispered. "The fire. The screams." He crossed to her, soaked and shaking. "You're safe here," he said, though his voice broke. "I don't know how to believe that." "Then borrow my belief," he said simply. She looked at him, something breaking open in her face. Trust, maybe, or the echo of it. When the storm roared loudest, she pressed herself against him, her fingers clutching his shirt as if she could anchor herself to his steadiness. He held her until dawn, until the thunder finally faded into distant murmurs. When morning came, the world was new again, wet earth steaming beneath sunlight, the scent of rain sharp and sweet. Clara stepped outside barefoot, tilting her face to the light. Her blanket hung loose, her hair tangled, her smile unguarded. Elias watched her, his heart caught between awe and peace. "You look like someone the world forgot to break," he said. She laughed softly, that rare, fragile sound. "Maybe the world tried and I forgot to let it." They rebuilt the garden that day, their hands side by side in the dirt. The air was clean, the sky rinsed blue. For the first time, Elias felt the weight he'd carried for years begin to lift, not vanish but settle, gentled by her presence. He realized then that she had never really asked him for rescue. She had asked him for witness. Years later, folks in Red Hollow still spoke of them, the quiet cowboy and the woman who sang to the land. Some said they saw them once, riding into the horizon at dusk, her hand resting light on his arm. Others said they built a home by the river and grew old there, tending the same soil that had first brought them peace. No one knew for sure. Only Harlan Pike, the old station master, remembered the night she walked barefoot up to a stranger and said, "Please accept me as your wife." He would tell the tale sometimes, voice low, eyes distant. They weren't running from the world, he'd say. They were teaching it how to begin again. And if you ever pass through Red Hollow when the sky is bleeding gold and the rails hum like a lullaby, you might feel it too, the ghost of mercy turned to love, of sorrow made sacred by time. Because sometimes the heart does not fall in love. It simply remembers what it was made for.